So an element will have properties like its color, its border, or font, or whatnot. What is CSS? It's acronym for Cascading Style Sheet. Cascading is something we're going to learn later on in the tutorial. It just means that multiple styles can be created and overlapped so that you can have like a global website style that applies to all your elements, or you can be even more specific, so you're applying a style to a specific element. And these can kind of overlap, and based on the how you select the element will be when that style is applied. A style deals specifically with the presentation of the domain of designing a web page. So in HTML, we're just creating content, we're entering stuff text that people need to read. Style isn't really necessary for the web page, but allows us to create a visual presentation so that our web pages look professional. The last is sheet. It's normally you put CSS in a separate file. Some people also like to you can actually put it in the actual HTML page. My personal belief is that it should always go in a file. Sometimes you'll see it at the top in the header, but normally it's in a separate file with the suffix .css. Why CSS? Well, it allows us to create a richer document appearances than just plain old HTML. HTML used to be able to be the all-in-one markup language for creating all your presentation and layout and everything, but then it just became too unwieldy. Like, you'd have all these style information along with your content, and it was hard to figure out where your content was going in at and how to change content. So they separated these two things, your content and your HTML, and your visual presentation in this CSS. By doing that, it reduces your workload. So if you want to change a visual style, you just go straight to the CSS and change it instead of hunting through your HTML to see where it's at. Also, it can be abstracted so that multiple pieces of your HTML, multiple elements, can have the same visual style from this one point in your CSS page. And also by doing that, it reduces the download size because you're not duplicating this information, it's all in one spot. Alright, so in this example, we're going to have an HTML page. I'm kind of just going to, there's so many like little parts to it with CSS, I'm not going to just list them out or all your eyes will glaze over. So I'm going to play around with it. You can ask me to try something out. I'll kind of like guide how we're going to play out with these properties and values. But we're going to start off with an HTML page called pig, and we're going to put some lipstick on it. If political reference. So lipstick is going to be the lipstick.css. If you notice in the we're going to put it in the head of the HTML. That's at the top part of the HTML, and you need this syntax that says link. It's a style sheet. The type of style sheet is text CSS, and how we know that it's lipstick.css, it's going to find it in this href, lipstick.css, and this whole thing is a single element tag that we're going to put in the head. So let's go ahead and do that.
Just kind of a naming question. What's the difference between the a space href and then just href?
Well, href generally deals with a location, like on your own specific file server. You can have like you can be in the same directory, or it can be an actual URL like HTTP. So it's generalized so that you can use href to reference another page, either on the internet or on your own system. So they use it in this instance to reference the CSS. For the A, it uses it to reference that when you click on this, it's going to go to that other page.
Oh, okay.
So A basically puts a link in like a hyperlink. And then
Right.
you click
It treats it as a hyperlink that you click on. Alright, so basic tutorial. I'm starting off with the minimal document that I described before in the last tutorial on HTML. Everything in here will validate. It has a title, head, body, and in this head I'm going to, let's see if I can copy that and put it right in here. Okay, so what this is saying then is, since I'm not really providing a path, I'm just calling the name of the CSS file. That means it has to be in the same directory as this HTML file. So let me go ahead and create that CSS file here. Text document, lipstick.css. Yep. Okay, so the syntax of CSS has these separate parts. There's two main parts. There's the selector, which is kind of half of what doing CSS is you have to select pieces of your HTML in order to apply the style to it. And it can get fairly complicated as far as like which piece of HTML do you want to select, how many. You can select a set of HTML elements, and the selector has its own logic of selecting these specific pieces of HTML to apply the style to. The other half is the actual style block, where you can, for these elements that have been selected, you can apply these properties to that element, like color and background, and then you set your own specific style values to these properties. Selectors select elements to apply a declared style. There's 4 different kinds of selectors that we're going to learn. There's the element selectors, which selects all elements of a specific type. So your HTML has its own set of element types, like body, H1, which is the header, P, which is a paragraph, A, and whatnot. So if you have a selector that has H1 as its selector, it will select all of H1 elements in your document and apply the style to it. Body will select your whole entire body of your document and apply the style to it. The second type of selector is a class selector. What this does is it selects all elements that belong to a given class. I'll show you what class is afterwards. And then there's another one that's ID, that selects a single element that's been given a unique ID. The difference between class and ID is your document can only have one ID, but it can have many different elements with the same class. So if you apply a style to an ID, an element with an ID, it only gets applied to that one element instead of the class, which gets applied to a group or a set of elements. And the last one is a little bit more tricky. It's a pseudo selector. And this allows you to do like fancy things, like when you hover over an element and then it changes color. It basically is like when a user invokes a state on this element, like it's hovering over it, or it's already been clicked on, or if that link has already been visited, then the state changes, and then you can apply your own style to it. Like I said, element selectors, here's an example. H1 is the selector. We're going to change all H1's color, their font color, to blue. So let me go ahead and try that. Okay. So H1, there's the selector. The syntax is you have an opening bracket, and I usually just add the closing bracket so I make sure I have both of them. I'm going to change its color. The syntax is colon, and you can type in blue. It'll recognize blue as a specific color. And then when you're done with that style, you close it with a semicolon. Save it. Here in my body is empty. So I'm going to add H1, this header, H1. And just to compare, I'm going to have H2. It shouldn't select H2 because I'm only selecting elements with H1. Should select H2, H1. You know what, that's a little small. Let me see if I can get it bigger. There we go. Can you read that better now from back then? Okay. It should select this. Okay, so we have the style sheet in there. This HTML page is referencing that lipstick.css style sheet. It should apply it to our pig, and our H1s should be blue, if this goes right. So let me go ahead and open up our pig.xhtml. Let me open it with Firefox. Okay, so this is a general HTML error. It means that our style sheet isn't formed right in the head. So let's see what's wrong with that. Okay, so I copied this from somewhere else. It doesn't like my quotes. So I'm just replacing the quotes here. Okay, I know it should work. Refresh it. Okay, so this header was selected and this header was selected, but the H2 wasn't selected. So that the H1 allowed us to differentiate between the two elements. The second type of selector is the class selector. Right here we have a class name called legs. We can have many different legs, and we can apply these two different styles to elements that have the class name equal to legs. So let me tab. Okay, I'm going to create an element here. I think I can just get away with A. Pig leg 1. Pig leg 2. Okay, this pig has 2 legs, and in order to apply the class to these elements, we have to add an attribute to these elements called class. We're going to equal that to legs. the class name that we're going to select is legs. So our selector is going to find any element that has the class name legs and apply a style to it. So let's go ahead and create legs. In order to make it a class selector, you do a dot and then the class name. So dot legs. We can say font weight equals bold, and we can have the color red. So it's going to apply, each time it finds legs, it's going to have its font weight bold and its color red. Go ahead and save that, and let's refresh. Alright, so this isn't applying. I wonder if I didn't save the other one. Okay. There we go. Okay, so it made them bold, and it added the color red to them. So is everyone on board with class? Does that make sense, or do you want me to have some more examples? Okay. Okay, the next selector is the ID selector. Now you can only have one element with a specific ID, unlike class where multiple elements can have the same class, like legs. This one, a pig can only have one snout, so we're going to create a snout selector. And in order to do the ID selector, it's a £, and then we can type in the name of our selector. And let's say we can have the border color is equal to green, and background. I'll get into all these different properties later. I just kind of want to show you the selectors first. Background equals, I think I'll even just say orange. Save that. Let's create a snout. P. The ID equals snout. Okay, so it should find the element whose ID is snout and apply the background color and the border to it. Okay, I don't think you can add the border to paragraphs then. Certain properties get applied to elements, or certain ones it doesn't understand what to do with it. So what we're going to do is just take it out. We'll get into some elements that can take a border color. I usually just use it for an element called div. And the last selector is the pseudo selector. You use this a lot for, like, if you're selecting something in a list, and you wanna, whenever someone hovers over an item that they can click on, then it helps you see like what the user is hovering over, or if it's a link that can be clicked on, or if it's already been visited. I'm not describing like all the different selectors, but these are just the main ones that people use all the time. So let's go ahead and create an anchor. We can actually add it to these anchors over here. We can call this, let me just first, not even worry about. So if you notice, both of our anchors, their class is named legs. We could either do it so that our anchor has the pseudo selector hover, or we could use our dot legs to select it. It can be selected in both ways, because if you notice, both our anchors have legs as the class, but it's also both of them are anchors. So let's go ahead and add the pseudo selector. The pseudo selector is, the syntax is the colon, and you can put in hover or link or visited specifically for anchors. And we're going to change, when they hover over it, we're going to change the background color to blue. Okay, so it's going to look for these anchors. Actually, it's going to look for specifically the class name legs, and if you hover over them, which is the state that the user is putting on it, it's going to apply the background color of blue. Okay, so now they're red, and if I hover over them, they're blue now. Is there any questions on all the 4 different kinds of selectors? Okay. A lot of times you have these different selectors that you've already created, but you want to add another style to them. Instead of creating a style for each of these different selectors, you can group the selectors all into one block. And you do that by putting a comma in between each selector. So let's say we want to have anything that it's an H1 element, and anything that has a class legs, or if it has an ID of snout, we want to change its font size to 20. Okay, so we can add that down here, H1, comma, dot legs, comma, snout. So all these other styles will still be applied, but we're adding to them, we're cascading on them so that this style gets applied as well to all 3 selectors. Save it. Okay, let's go ahead and refresh. Okay, so now everything has been changed to 20 point. If you notice the headers, which had automatically their own font size, it even falls in line because we told it that we want it to be 20 point instead. But everything else is 20 point. By doing this last example, you can kind of see where there's a problem. What if we had H1's background color red, but in our new selector where we want H1's color to be background color to be blue? Well, which one does the browser follow? This goes into the conflict resolution logic involved with these cascading styles. First, it sees sees which one is more specific, which selector selects this one element more specifically. And secondly, if they're both the same, if both selectors are the same, then which one was applied last? So I'm going to demonstrate which one was applied last because our selectors are the same right now. So I'm going to add background. We're going to say the background is purple. And if you notice, this will conflict with Snout up here, who says its background should be orange. So since purple was declared after this one, it should be purple instead of orange. And so it changed it to purple instead of orange. But now if I put it before that one, take it out and put it before everything. So now we're saying Snout is purple, but then we change it to orange afterwards. So it follows that Snout should be orange then. The other way to do it, instead of, let's say you can't touch a style that has already declared it to be orange or purple, but you still want to change it for your specific page. We have this sometimes because LinguistList has a global style sheet that gets applied to all of our pages. But let's say for some reason you wanted to change the heading background color to green instead of blue for what our global CSS page wants it to be. Generally you don't want to touch the global CSS page because Marina has already worked hard on it, and but you want to still change your own style. We can set it by 3 different ways. We can have the order of specificity. From our different selectors, we have element type, class, and ID. If you say something has a selector that is an ID, that'll be more specific than selecting it by its class. So an element can have both an ID and a class, but if you select it by its ID, it will follow that one over class. And the same is true for element type. If you have a class and the other selector is only selecting element types, it should only apply the style to those that have a class. Another way is to combine selectors. So you can have the element and the class, or the element and the ID. And that will select anything that has an element of P plus it has a class of legs, or has an element of H2 plus it has an ID of snout. So let me demonstrate that. Okay, so up in here, we're saying legs should be purple, and then we're saying down here, we're overriding it. I'm sorry, snout should be purple, and then we're overriding it and saying snout should be orange. But let's add, what is snout? Snout is a P. So you can see P, ID, snout. So if we do that, I believe Sometimes the rules are different in browsers, so let me check that. Okay, so since we combined the element and the ID, it knows it's more specific than just having the ID. Do you guys follow that? Or do you want me to explain that a little bit better? So if I take off the P, this purple is going to be overridden by this guy because they're both the same selector, snout and snout. So it follows the first rule. This one came last, so it's going to do this. But if we add more, make this more specific instead of ambiguous by saying that we want this element and this ID, then it applies purple instead of overriding it with orange.
What P stands for? That one?
P stands for that this element
Oh,
is P.
over there, okay.
Yeah, this element right here is P. So we're saying in this selector P snout. I can go ahead and get rid of this so we can focus on P snout. The element P with the ID snout, ID, this snout is an ID selector, you can see by the pound sign, and then snout should be purple, versus this snout being orange. Usually it would be overwritten. But since we're adding this P here, we're being more specific about our selector. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The last way that we can make our selector even more specific is if we place it in the context of our HTML tree. So right here, if we can describe where our element is at inside of the tree by the elements that it's embodied in, followed by a space, followed by its child element, followed by a space, followed by the element that we want to select. So if you notice here, if we have ID equals snout, that's the child of this tree, and then P class pig head, that's above it, and then body.pig, that's even more above it. So we're describing this HTML tree, and we're being very specific. This is the most specific that you can be with your selectors, is describing it in the context of our tree. Don't get confused with grouping selectors where we had commas in between. That just means apply to all these selectors. This one is describing the actual tree, and it's saying specifically this snout within this pig head, within this pig, we want to apply our style to. Okay? So we're going to battle our selectors here. This one is saying P. Notice how this one, first we had pound snout, and that was overriding this guy. So we added a P, and then this one overwrote the bottom one. So now let's even be more specific. Okay, so I'm going to create a tree here. I'm going to add more detail to this page. Pig head. I'm giving this this div an ID of pig head because the snout goes in the pig head. So I'm going to select, by using the context of the tree, I want this snout, not this snout, by changing this one, div pig head snout. So this is describing this div ID pig head and its child snout. Its background is orange. So we have the tree pig head snout, and this should be orange, but this one should remain purple. Okay? Does everyone follow along with that? Okay. All right, so we had a lot of conflicts with our styles, and the browser tried to figure out which style is it going to apply. But you can also have like different style sheets coming from different directories being applied to this page. And one tool that I found useful is this Firebug toolbar.
It's not conflict with the other CSS that, like the CSS, HTML, 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 and then you take the other CSS, something like that?
Yeah, you can have
But there's not a
multiple
conflict
style
with it.
sheets being applied to your HTML.
Oh,
Like we have our ll.style.css style sheet that gets added to each of our linguist list pages. That's done in the header automatically for you. But if you add another style sheet to it, it might conflict with our global site CSS page. And so it kind of gets it's a lot of work to figure out how this style sheet's being conflicting with another style sheet. And so a useful tool for finding that out is this Firebug. Does that answer your question, Oki?
yeah.
Okay. I have it already installed here, but you could get it at getfirebug.com, and it's just a Firefox add-on tool that helps you figure out all your style sheet information. And so what you can do is you can figure out, well, why is this one orange and not blue? Well, you can right-click on it. I've already installed this Firebug, so I have this inspect element when I right-click on the element. And I can click on that. And you notice it goes down to where I selected the pig head and then the snout, and it tells me over here what is. I'm sorry, that doesn't get bigger. But what it says right here is it says that div pound pig head snout is being applied. Its background is orange. And then right here it says p pound snout, the one that is less specific, it's crossed out. And it tells you where in the CSS file that each of these are at. So you can see why isn't my style sheet being applied to this specific element. Why is it conflicting? And you can see, well, this style is even more specific, and the one that's crossed out isn't as specific, so it's not being applied to this element that I right-clicked on. I could do the same for this one, this element. I'm going to inspect it. And it has the ID of snout, but it's not inside of pig head, so it only has one style being applied to it, and so it's purple. So I use this tool a lot for when I'm doing web development. I don't know how people used to do it. It seemed like it would take a lot longer before using this tool. Okay, so now there's two element tags. What are we at on time right now?
3:15.
3:15. Okay. So much do I got? Okay, there's two elements. There's that are very useful for CSS, but they don't have any semantic meaning. Like they don't specify this as a header or paragraph or anything like that. They're just specifically for adding a style to pieces of your to parts of your page, in order, just it's basically just so it can look pretty, but it's not really necessary other than using it for CSS. So we have span. We can put span inside of a paragraph to have only a part of the paragraph have a style. So inside of this paragraph, inside of snout, I'm going to add a span tag. I'm going to say it's class equals nose, and then I'm going to close it after this. I only want this one snout outside of everyone else. To have a specific style applied to it. So I'm going to create a class called nose. And does anyone have any questions on how would you apply color or background? Do you have any idea or suggestions on what nose should be? No? Okay. I'm going to apply underline to nose. Okay, so it should apply underline just to the specifics now. Okay, so I found this one right here. Can you see that? It's maybe if I take off the background color. I can also say I can change nose's background.
Spelled it.
Background.
What's that?
Background.
Spelled it.
Oh. Okay. Let's try white. Okay. So I found this snout that I had the span tag around, and it selected that, and it said only this one's background is white. So the span tag is useful just picking out little pieces of your text that you want to change the style. Another useful tag is div. Div is really useful for creating layouts. I'm not going to get into layouts because I think we're already over time right now. But you can add borders. It's basically just a box that you can put all of your content in. Like you have a section of your page that you want to change the background or put a border or place it anywhere else on the page. Usually encapsulate it in a div tag. Color, background color. Those properties you can have the name of the color, or you have this even more specific. Each color has a red, green, blue value to it, and these hexadecimal numbers apply to these colors. So you can either say black, or you can have all zeros, or red, or FF00, and so on. And there's a lot more colors. You can change these numbers around to be a specific color. Another tool that's useful for applying color or figuring out what color you want to apply to an element is this ColorZilla. And it allows you to find what is, like, how do I figure out what this 6-digit number is? So let's say I go to the Linguist List website, and I'm like, well, that's not really red or orange or anything. So I've already installed ColorZilla. I have this eyedropper tool down here. So I click on the eyedropper, and then I click on the color that I want to know what its value is. And if you can see down here at the bottom, it already starts to show you in the pound sign. Can you see that? What the color value is. So if I roam around on this page, it's going to show me this yellow is specifically F8EF00. So I can click on it, and the little eyedropper turns to that color. I can right click here and copy that value to my clipboard and change the background of nose to that same yellow that I found on the Linguist List page. So now it's that same yellow that I pulled from here. Alright, so there's a lot of other properties. There's background image properties, font, text, list, and border. Do you guys want to stick around for playing around with these, or do you want to save it for another tutorial?
Just save it.
I have to go.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to go.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Dwight.
Yep.
I'm really sorry we are stretched out like that. We had a surprise guest, wasn't supposed